when a 7-year-old girl in a wheelchair rolled toward the most feared dog in the shelter. Everyone froze. Volunteers whispered, "Stay back. He's dangerous." Even the shelter manager held her breath. At the end of the row sat Rex, a scarred German shepherd with eyes that spoke of battles lost and hope long gone. He'd been labeled aggressive, his red tag a warning that no one dared ignore. For months, he had growled at every kind hand, snapped at every attempt to comfort him. But Emma didn't see the monster everyone else saw. She saw a soul as trapped as she was, broken, but still fighting to exist. And that day, she decided to do the unthinkable. As her wheels creaked forward and Rex's growl filled the air, something shifted. A sound, a heartbeat, a breath that no one in the shelter would ever forget. This isn't just a story about a rescue dog. It's about how love, in its quietest form, can reach even the most unreachable heart. The rain had been falling since dusk, whispering against the tin roof of the small-town rescue shelter. It wasn't a violent storm, just a steady, endless drizzle, the kind that seeps into the walls and makes everything feel older, colder, lonelier. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming faintly, as if even they were tired. Rows of kennels lined the narrow corridor. Most were alive with sound, the sharp yips of terriers, the nervous pacing of shepherd mixes, the pleading eyes of beagles pressing against metal bars. Their cries echoed off the damp concrete, overlapping into a desperate chorus of wanting out, wanting love, wanting someone. But at the far end of the row, in a shadowed corner where the light barely reached, there was silence. That's where Rex sat. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He was a statue of muscle and scars, a creature that had forgotten what it meant to be alive. The only sign of breath came from the slow rise and fall of his chest, the faint flare of his nostrils as the scent of wet fur and disinfectant drifted through the air. A volunteer named Lydia hesitated halfway down the hall, a bowl of food trembling in her hands. She leaned toward another worker, whispering, "That one's trouble." The other woman nodded quickly, her eyes darting toward the dark kennel. "Keep your distance. He doesn't like anyone near him." They slid the bowl through the narrow slot at the bottom of the cage, careful not to make sudden movements. The moment the bowl scraped the floor, Rex's head lifted. His lips curled back, exposing teeth that gleamed faintly under the flickering light. A deep growl rolled from his chest, low, guttural, vibrating the metal around him. Lydia flinched. "Easy, boy," she whispered, even though she knew words never worked. The red tag on his kennel swung slightly, catching the dim light. In blocky black letters it read, "Aggressive. Use caution." No one knew exactly how long he had been there. Months, maybe longer. No one visited him. No one dared. Most of the dogs in the shelter came and went within weeks, but Rex remained, a silent ghost haunting the end of the corridor. Up close, he was both magnificent and broken. His body was large and powerful, the unmistakable frame of a German shepherd once bred for strength and precision. But time had taken its toll. Old scars ran across his shoulders and neck, some healed unevenly, others still raised and red beneath the fur. His left ear had a notch missing, and around his throat hung the frayed remains of a leather collar, half torn, like someone had tried to cut him loose and didn't finish the job. His eyes, though, were the hardest to look at. Not because they were fierce, but because they weren't. They were hollow, haunted. Eyes that once must have burned with loyalty and purpose now looked through everything as if nothing mattered anymore. When the volunteers left for the night, the shelter grew quiet again. One by one, the dogs settled into uneasy sleep, tails twitching, soft whimpers filling the space. But Rex stayed awake, lying in the dark with his head between his paws. He didn't eat. He didn't rest. He just listened. To the hum of the lights, to the dripping of rain outside, to the occasional creak of the old building shifting with the weather. And then every night, when the world had gone still enough that even the rats dared to emerge, Rex would lift his head and let out a sound that didn't belong to this earth. It started low, almost a sigh. Then it rose, long, aching, full of something raw and human. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't even a howl. It was grief, pure and unfiltered. The janitor, an old man named Carl, would pause in his mopping whenever he heard it. Sometimes he'd whisper to himself, "Lord, whatever that dog's seen, I hope he forgets it soon." Then he'd move on, pretending not to feel the lump rising in his throat. But Rex never forgot. In the darkness, fragments of memory flashed behind his closed eyes. The sharp echo of gunfire, the barked command of a handler's voice, the smell of smoke and fear. Then the leash pulling tight, a shout, pain, a blur of movement, someone falling. The sound of panic, the snap of the leash breaking. Then silence. He remembered running, the pounding of his paws on gravel, the sirens fading behind him. He remembered hunger, rain, and the sting of cold nights. And then, finally, the hands that caught him, rough, unkind, dragging him into a van that smelled of bleach and despair. Since then, the world had been reduced to this: 4 metal walls and a bowl of food he never touched. Every once in a while, a new volunteer would appear, bright-eyed, full of hope. They'd kneel by his cage, trying to see the good in him. They'd speak softly, use words like "sweet boy" and "it's okay." But when Rex's growl rumbled up, that fragile hope always cracked. They'd back away, tell the others he was too far, gone. And Rex would watch them leave, something like guilt flickering behind his eyes. Because deep down, he wasn't angry. He was afraid. Afraid of the sound of his own heartbeat, of the ghosts that followed him even here. Afraid that maybe the world had already decided what he was, and that no amount of waiting could change it. Sometimes, when the moonlight slipped through the narrow window above his cage, it would catch the silver streak in his fur. For a brief second, he almost looked noble again, like the working dog he once was. But then the light would shift, and the illusion would vanish, leaving only a trembling shadow of what used to be a hero. Rain dripped through a leak in the roof, forming a small puddle outside his kennel. The reflection wavered with every drop, showing Rex's face fractured by ripples, as if even the water couldn't decide what it saw in him. Lydia passed one last time before leaving for the night. She paused, clutching her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Poor thing," she murmured. "Whatever happened to you?" Her voice trailed off. She knew the stories. How he'd once saved a child from a burning car. How later, during a raid gone wrong, he'd bitten his handler. How that single moment erased everything he'd ever done right. Now, he was just a label on a red tag. Before turning off the lights, Lydia whispered toward the cage, "Someone will come for you, someday." Rex didn't move. But as the door closed and the shelter fell into darkness, his ears twitched ever so slightly, like he'd heard her. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. The town slept, and in that lonely corner of the shelter, Rex finally lowered his head and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, the howling stopped, but the silence that followed was even sadder. The next morning crept into the shelter slowly, gray light slipping through rain-streaked windows, The storm had eased, leaving behind the scent of wet concrete and disinfectant. Somewhere down the hallway, a dog barked twice, sharp and hollow, then went quiet again. The air felt heavy, the kind of morning where everyone moved slower, spoke softer, as if even hope had caught a chill. Inside the cramped break room, a small group of volunteers gathered around a chipped table. Coffee steamed in paper cups, and a radio murmured low from the counter, the static louder than the music. Jackets hung dripping near the door, puddles forming beneath them. Lydia stirred her coffee absently, eyes tired from another restless night. "I swear," she murmured, "I could still hear him howling when I got home, even after I turned on the TV to drown it out." Across from her, Mark, one of the senior volunteers, sighed. "That's Rex for you. The others settle down once the lights go off, but not him. It's like he's haunted." "Haunted?" Lydia repeated. "You make him sound like a ghost." Mark shrugged, rubbing his palms together as if to chase off the chill. "Maybe he is. Some of these dogs, they carry things you can't see." The youngest volunteer, Ellie, had just joined the shelter last week. She looked between them with a mix of confusion and curiosity. "I heard someone say he used to be a police dog. Is that true?" Mark leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "That's what the file says, though half of it's blacked out. K9 unit. Served 3 years. Then—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Then something happened. A raid gone bad. They say he bit his own handler." Ellie's eyes widened. "Bit his handler? Why?" "That's the part no one knows," Lydia said quietly. "Some say it was fear. Others say confusion. Maybe the gunfire, the shouting. It was too much." He turned and snapped. "They called it aggression, wrote him off as unstable." Mark gave a bitter laugh. One mistake and everything he ever did right vanished overnight. Used to save lives, you know. They said he pulled a child out of a wreck once. And now look at him. The room fell silent for a moment, only the hum of the refrigerator filling the space. Lydia stared at her coffee, watching the surface ripple as her hands trembled. From the hallway came the faint metallic clang of a food bowl being slid across concrete. The sound echoed, followed by a low, familiar growl. Deep, warning, alive. Everyone knew that sound. "Guess he's awake," Mark muttered. "Still won't eat unless no one's looking." Ellie bit her lip. "Has anyone tried sitting with him? Maybe he just needs time." Lydia smiled sadly. "We've all tried, sweetheart. Some dogs just don't come back from whatever broke them." Ellie frowned, unwilling to accept that. She stood, brushing crumbs off her jeans. "Maybe he just needs someone different." Mark shook his head but didn't stop her. "Just be careful. He's not like the others." Ellie nodded and slipped out of the room. The corridor outside was long and cold, lined with steel cages and the muffled chorus of restless animals. The scent of wet fur and bleach filled her nose. As she walked, the barking softened. One by one, the dogs quieted, until she reached the far end, where silence took over. There he was. Rex sat exactly as he had the night before, unmoving, head low, eyes half hidden in shadow. The red tag still swung faintly from the bars. Aggressive, use caution, as if it had been written in warning to the world itself. Ellie crouched a few feet from the cage. "Hey, boy," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You're Rex, right? I'm Ellie." No reaction, just the slow flick of his tail against the floor, not in greeting, but in warning. She noticed his bed, just a thin sheet of burlap, damp from the rain that had leaked through the old roof. Without thinking, she shrugged off her jacket and pulled a small blanket from the supply shelf nearby. It was soft, faded blue, with frayed edges. She slid it carefully under the bars, keeping her movements slow and steady. Rex's eyes flicked toward her hand. For a heartbeat, she saw something. Not aggression, but confusion. His muscles tightened, yet he didn't growl. "That's it," she whispered. "It's just a blanket. Something warm." He didn't move, but his gaze followed her every motion. His eyes, amber, clouded with exhaustion, reflected a flicker of light from the overhead bulb. When she finally stood and stepped back, she saw him lower his nose, sniffing the fabric. Then, quietly, he rested one paw on it. Ellie smiled, her breath catching. "Good boy." Behind her, the door creaked open. The shelter director, Mrs. Donnelly, stepped inside holding a stack of paperwork. Her voice carried the weight of routine sadness. "Ellie, breakfast break's over. Come on." Ellie turned. "He's calmer today," she said softly. "Maybe." "Don't get attached," Mrs. Donnelly interrupted, her tone firm but kind. "That dog's been here too long. We've done what we can. If no one adopts him this month." She trailed off, setting the clipboard down with a sigh. "We may have to make a decision." The words hung in the air like a sentence waiting to be carried out. Ellie's throat tightened. She glanced back at Rex, who now lay with his head on the blanket, eyes open but distant. "He just needs a chance," she whispered. Mrs. Donnelly rubbed her temples. "We've said that before, with others. But he's different." The older woman gave a weary smile. "They all are, until the bite comes." She turned and left, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The sound faded, leaving only the soft hum of the lights and the faint patter of rain against the window. Ellie stood there a moment longer, feeling helpless. Finally, she crouched near the cage again, voice trembling. "Don't give up yet, okay? Someone will come for you. Someday." Rex lifted his head slightly. Their eyes met, one filled with youth and fragile hope, the other dulled by too many disappointments. For a fleeting second, something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. A shared understanding of loneliness. Ellie pressed her palm against the cold metal. "You were a hero once, weren't you? Maybe you still are." The dog didn't answer. He simply blinked, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging her words before lowering his head again. When Ellie finally turned to leave, she didn't notice the faintest movement inside the cage. The slow, cautious lift of Rex's paw, dragging the blanket closer to his chest. Back in the break room, the volunteers fell silent as she re-entered. Mark looked up. "You okay?" Ellie nodded, though her eyes shimmered. "Yeah," she whispered. "He's not gone yet." Outside, the morning rain began again. Gentle, steady, patient. And down the hall, for the first time in weeks, Rex closed his eyes and slept, without growling. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the town washed clean and glimmering beneath the morning sun. Puddles sparkled like tiny mirrors on the sidewalk outside the shelter, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and new beginnings. For the first time in days, light poured through the dusty front windows of the rescue center, painting golden streaks across the floor. The bell above the door jingled softly as Emma and her mother entered. Emma was 7, small, delicate, but with eyes that carried more weight than any child's should. Her hair, chestnut brown, was tied neatly with a yellow ribbon that matched her sundress. Stickers of stars and smiling puppies decorated the sides of her wheelchair, a patchwork of color that tried to disguise the truth beneath. that she hadn't stood on her own 2 feet since the accident. Her mother, Laura, pushed the chair gently across the tiled floor. The woman's movements were tender but weary, the kind of weariness that comes from long nights and quiet heartbreak. She smiled at the receptionist, who greeted them with practiced warmth. "Good morning," the receptionist said. "Looking to adopt today?" Laura nodded, forcing cheer into her tone. "We're hoping to find a new friend." Emma's hands rested quietly in her lap. Her gaze was already wandering past the counter, toward the rows of kennels that lined the hall. The air was thick with sound. Barks, whines, tails thudding against metal. Life everywhere. The receptionist leaned forward, glancing at Emma. "We have some sweet ones today. A retriever mix who loves kids, a beagle that can't stop wagging his tail." Her smile faltered for just a second, her eyes flicking down the corridor. "And a few others still getting used to people." Laura followed her glance but said nothing. They made their way down the narrow hall. Dogs barked joyfully as they passed, eager faces pressing against the bars. A golden retriever spun in circles, tail a blur. A small terrier jumped so high his paws nearly cleared the door. Their enthusiasm was contagious, but not for Emma. She smiled politely at each, reaching out now and then to let one sniff her fingers, but her eyes kept drifting farther down, to the shadowed end of the aisle, to the place where light seemed to stop. Laura noticed. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "there are so many friendly ones here. Look at this one. She's wagging just for you." Emma's gaze didn't move. "I know," she murmured, "but he's the only one who looks like he gave up." Her mother's heart sank at the words. Down at the far end, in the dim corner, sat Rex, still, silent, watching. From this distance, Emma couldn't see the scars or the tag on his kennel. She only saw the stillness, the heavy kind of sadness that seemed to hang around him like fog. The other dogs barked and jumped, desperate for attention. But Rex simply sat there, his gaze unmoving, as if the world had nothing left to offer him. Laura hesitated. "Honey, maybe we should stay with the ones up front. That one looks tired." "I just want to see him," Emma said. Her voice wasn't stubborn. It was quiet, calm, but filled with something that made Laura pause. As they rolled closer, the barking around them softened, as though the other dogs sensed something different passing through the hall. The light from the skylight thinned the deeper they went, until only thin ribbons of sunlight reached the floor. The air grew cooler, the smell of metal stronger. The shelter's manager, Mrs. Donnelly, appeared from around the corner, clipboard in hand. "Oh, hi there. You must be the family looking to adopt." "Yes," Laura said, smiling faintly. "We're just looking." Mrs. Donnelly's eyes fell on Emma, her expression softening. "You've come on a good day, sweetheart. We've got some real sweethearts in here." Emma nodded, polite but distracted. Her gaze was locked on Rex's cage now, on the dark shape that sat motionless in the corner. Mrs. Donnelly followed her line of sight, and her demeanor shifted instantly. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. "Oh, that one. Maybe we skip him today, "Why?" Emma asked. Mrs. Donnelly hesitated. "He's had a hard past, not very friendly with visitors." Emma tilted her head. "Does he bite?" The woman smiled thinly. "He could." Laura placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Let's see another, okay?" But Emma wasn't listening. Her eyes softened, a faint furrow forming between her brows. Not in fear, but in sympathy. "He doesn't look angry," she said quietly. "He looks sad." Mrs. Donnelly opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. How do you explain to a child that some pain turns inward until it becomes silence instead of rage? The corridor seemed to shrink around them. The sounds of barking faded, replaced by the distant hum of a ceiling fan. Emma's wheelchair creaked as she shifted forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe he just forgot how to be happy. Laura exhaled, torn between pride and worry. Sweetheart, not every dog can be saved. Emma's small hand reached up to touch her mother's. Then maybe he doesn't need saving, she said. Maybe he just needs someone to remember him. The sentence landed in the quiet like a stone in still water. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even Mrs. Donnelly's eyes softened. The clipboard lowered slightly. All right, she said at last, her voice quieter now. You can look from here. Just don't get too close. Emma nodded. Her mother sighed and crouched beside her, the two of them framed in the pale morning light. From his corner, Rex turned his head. His ears twitched. His amber eyes flickered open, catching the sunlight just long enough to reveal a glint of gold before sinking back into shadow. The silence between them stretched, not empty, but full of something unspoken. Recognition. For the first time since entering, Emma smiled. A small, almost invisible smile, but real. Laura noticed and felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't seen that expression in months, not since before the hospital, before the wheelchairs, before the quiet nights where laughter never came. Mrs. Donnelly cleared her throat gently. We'll give you a few minutes. She turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving them alone with the soft hum of the lights and the sound of a distant bark. Emma leaned forward, still watching. Rex didn't move, but his gaze stayed on her, cautious, curious. Laura finally whispered, You really like him, don't you? Emma nodded slowly. I think he's lonely. Her mother smiled weakly. Maybe you both are. Neither of them noticed the subtle shift inside the cage, the faint, uncertain flick of a tail, like a ghost of something long forgotten. Outside, sunlight spilled brighter through the windows, washing away the gray corners of the room. The air seemed lighter, warmer, and for the first time in a very long while, in the lonely shelter where broken souls were caged behind steel, two hearts that had forgotten what hope felt like found themselves staring quietly at one another. The air inside the shelter had shifted. What moments ago felt calm and curious now felt tight, like the whole building was holding its breath. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked, followed by the faint metallic echo of a water bowl sliding across the floor. Every sound seemed sharper, closer, like the world itself was listening. Emma's small fingers gripped the sides of her wheelchair as her mother pushed her forward another few feet. The light grew dimmer the closer they got to the far end of the corridor, where the kennels gave way to shadows. The air here was colder, still holding the dampness from last night's rain. And then there he was again. Rex. He sat in the farthest corner of his cage, half hidden by the bars. The tag with the red warning still dangled from the metal door. Aggressive. Use caution. His amber eyes gleamed faintly under the flickering bulb above him. When he saw them approach, his body tensed instantly, like a coiled spring. Sweetheart, Laura whispered, her voice already trembling. Let's stop here, okay? But Emma's gaze didn't waver. There was something in her eyes, something quiet but stubborn, the kind of courage that didn't come from not feeling fear, but from refusing to back away from it. It's all right, Emma murmured. I just want to see him." Before her mother could respond, a low rumble filled the corridor. It wasn't loud at first, but it vibrated through the floor, through the air, through their bones. Rex was growling. The sound came from deep within his chest, raw and guttural, the kind of noise that warned the world to stay away. His lips curled back, showing teeth worn and yellowed from time, his nostrils flaring as he fixed his gaze not on Emma's face, but on the spinning wheels of her chair. They turned slowly as Laura tried to stop them from rolling forward, and to Rex, that strange movement was foreign, alien, something that didn't belong. The growl deepened. "Back up!" Mrs. Donnelly's voice echoed from behind, sharp but controlled. "Don't move any closer!" Emma froze. Her chest rose and fell in small, quick breaths. For a moment, fear clawed at her throat. Her hands trembled against the armrests. The air smelled like wet fur and iron, and she could hear the faint clink of Rex's claws against the concrete as he shifted his weight, muscles tight, ready. "Emma," her mother whispered urgently, stepping closer. "Honey, we need to go." But Emma didn't move. She couldn't. There was something about his eyes, the way they flickered between rage and pain, between warning and pleading. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of something trapped, inside fear, inside memory, inside himself. Her voice came out soft, shaking, but steady enough to be heard over the growl. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're just scared." For a split second, something happened. Barely noticeable, but real. The growl faltered. It didn't stop, but it broke for just one heartbeat, like a crack forming in a wall that had been solid for too long. Rex blinked. His ears twitched. Confusion flickered across his face. Laura's instinct kicked in. She rushed forward and grabbed the handles of the wheelchair, pulling it back sharply. "Emma, enough, we're leaving." "Please, Mom," Emma gasped, her voice rising for the first time. "Just let me talk." Her mother froze. The entire shelter seemed to fall silent. No barking, no footsteps, no rustle of paper or metal. Just that small, trembling voice standing against the growl of something that had forgotten how to trust. Laura's hands trembled against the handles of the chair. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could hear it in her ears. She looked at her daughter, this fragile, tiny girl who had already survived more pain than most adults ever would. And for a moment, she didn't see fear in her eyes. She saw conviction. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes. She exhaled shakily and slowly released her grip on the chair. The wheels stilled. The world held its breath again. Emma leaned forward ever so slightly, her small hand gripping the cold metal of the armrest, a symbol of courage, of grounding herself in the only thing she could control. Rex's growl softened into a low, uncertain rumble. His gaze lifted from the wheels to her face. His nostrils flared again, catching the scent of something new. Not fear, not dominance, but gentleness. "Hey," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." For a moment he froze completely. His ears twitched again, his body, still tense, leaned just slightly forward. Behind them, Mrs. Donnelly whispered to another volunteer, "I don't believe this." The girl's hand trembled, but she didn't pull back. The tension was unbearable, like a string stretched to the breaking point. Rex's tail flicked once. His breathing slowed. He didn't lunge, didn't snarl again. He just stood there, eyes locked on the little girl who refused to look away. It was a strange and fragile stillness, a moment of danger and grace intertwined. Laura's tears finally spilled over. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering through trembling lips, "Please don't hurt her. Please." But no harm came. Rex lowered his head by an inch, barely perceptible but enough to make every heart in the room stop. Emma's lips curved into the faintest smile. "See?" she said softly. "You're not bad. You're just scared." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but it carried a kind of calm no one could explain. Rex's ears turned forward. The growl had vanished completely now, replaced by a low, shaky breath, like someone remembering how to breathe after drowning. No one moved. The volunteers behind the glass watched in disbelief. For weeks, months, Rex had been a symbol of hopelessness, the one no one could reach. Yet here was a child, fragile and scarred in her own way, speaking to him like they'd known each other forever. Laura knelt beside the wheelchair, tears streaking her face. Her voice broke as she whispered, "How are you doing this?" Emma's eyes never left Rex. Maybe he just needed someone who understands what it feels like to be broken. Laura covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Rex's breathing steadied. His gaze softened, though his body still trembled. For the first time since his arrival, he wasn't fighting the space around him. He was simply existing in it, with her. Emma stayed silent now, just watching, letting the stillness fill the space where fear used to be. The camera, if there had been one, would have lingered there, on the little girl's hand gripping the cold metal of her chair, on her trembling lip, on the tears in her mother's eyes, on the massive dog whose world had suddenly stopped spinning long enough to notice light again. And for that fleeting moment, the lines between danger and salvation blurred into something new, something raw, trembling, and achingly human. The sound of the world returned slowly. A clock ticking in the distance, a bird chirping outside, a soft exhale from the cage. Rex stepped back once, his eyes still locked on hers, and the silence between them became an unspoken promise. Something inside him had shifted, a crack of light through years of darkness, and though no one dared say it aloud, everyone in that narrow corridor felt the same thing deep in their chests: hope. The corridor was still, the kind of stillness that settles after a storm, fragile, uncertain, and sacred. The growl that, had moments ago filled the air was gone, leaving behind only the sound of soft breathing. Dust floated in golden shafts of sunlight that slipped through the high windows, and for the first time since the shelter opened that morning, no one moved. Emma sat quietly in her wheelchair, her small hands resting on her lap. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was calm when she finally spoke. "Hi, Rex," she whispered. The name rolled softly through the air, unfamiliar to him, yet it made his ears twitch. His gaze stayed locked on her, his amber eyes narrowing, not in anger this time, but in curiosity, as if he were trying to remember something long forgotten. The volunteers behind the glass didn't dare speak. Mrs. Donnelly stood frozen with the clipboard pressed to her chest. Lydia, watching from the corner, felt tears gathering without knowing why. Emma tilted her head slightly, smiling faintly even as her lip trembled. "You know," she began, her voice low and thoughtful, "I used to run faster than the wind." Rex blinked. His ears flicked forward. "I'd race the kids at school," she continued, "barefoot on the grass. I used to think the wind was chasing me, but it never caught me." She paused. The faintest glint of sunlight touched her hair, catching the yellow ribbon that tied it back. "Then one day," she said softly, "I couldn't run at all." The words landed heavy in the air. Even without knowing what she meant, Everyone in that room felt the shift, the sudden gravity that filled the space. Her mother lowered her head, tears already tracing down her cheeks. Rex didn't move, but his breathing slowed. His gaze, sharp and guarded before, softened just a little. His body was still tense, yet something in the tone of her voice held him still. Emma took another breath, her fingers brushing the rim of her wheel, and I didn't like the hospital. Everything smelled like metal and medicine. People whispered a lot. They said things like, "She's strong," or "She's lucky to be alive." But I didn't feel lucky. Rex's tail twitched. "They said I'd get used to it," she went on, "but I didn't want to. I wanted to run again. I wanted to feel the grass under my feet." She looked down at her lap, her eyes glistening. "I got so mad sometimes that I yelled at everyone. I even yelled at Mom. I didn't want her to see me like that. I didn't want anyone to see me broken." The word hung there. Broken. Rex's breathing deepened. His paw shifted against the floor, or claws scraping faintly. The sound echoed through the silence like a heartbeat. Emma's gaze lifted to meet his. "But I think maybe you understand that, don't you? What it's like when something happens and you're just not the same anymore." She didn't know what made her say it. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Maybe it was the way his eyes carried stories she couldn't yet name. But she saw it, there. The weight of loss. The confusion of being judged by something you didn't mean to do. The loneliness that settles deep into the bones. Rex tilted his head. The first real movement he'd made in minutes. His ears lifted, uncertain but alert. Behind her, one of the volunteers whispered, "He's listening." Mrs. Donnelly nodded slowly, barely breathing. "He's never done that before." Emma smiled through her tears. "You don't have to be scared of me, Rex. I know what it's like when people think you're dangerous, or different, or just too much trouble." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "Sometimes they don't see that you're just hurting." For the first time, Rex blinked, slow, deliberate. His chest rose and fell with a heavy sigh. "Yeah," Emma whispered. "That's how I felt too." The shelter seemed to fade around them. The walls, the lights, even the sound of the rain beginning again outside. There was only her voice and his breathing, falling into rhythm like two hearts trying to remember the same song. "I used to dream that I was running again," she said softly. "Not on the ground, but through the sky. My legs didn't hurt there. I wasn't heavy, I wasn't trapped. I was free." Rex's ears twitched again. The faintest noise escaped him. Not a growl this time, but a whine. Barely audible, but real. Emma smiled through her tears. "You miss it too, don't you? Whatever you used to do before all this." Her mother watched in stunned silence. The woman's trembling hand hovered over the wheelchair handle, torn between fear and awe. She wanted to stop this, to protect her daughter, but she couldn't move. The sight before her was too fragile to interrupt, like watching sunlight touch something that had only known the dark. "I think maybe we both lost something," Emma whispered. "But maybe that doesn't mean it's gone forever. Maybe it just changed shape." Rex lowered his head slowly, his muzzle touching the cold concrete. His eyes never left hers. Emma's voice grew even softer. "You don't have to be what they say you are. I don't either." The two of them stayed like that. The girl in the chair and the dog behind the bars. Two beings who had been broken in different ways, now connected by the same invisible thread. Mrs. Donnelly felt something in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The volunteers exchanged glances, their eyes shining with disbelief. Lydia whispered, "It's like he understands every word." Emma brushed her cheek with the back of her hand. I think sometimes when you're hurt long enough, you stop trying to talk. But maybe if someone listens, even a little, the words come back." Rex's tail moved again, slow, unsure, but unmistakably alive. The moment stretched out, filled with the quiet hum of possibility. Emma reached toward the cage again, her hand trembling slightly. "You're not alone, Rex," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "Not anymore." The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was full of the kind of peace that only comes when pain finally meets understanding. Rex's breathing slowed to a steady rhythm. His eyes, once sharp with fear, now held something fragile, something that looked almost like trust. And as the morning light flickered through the windows and fell across their faces, it became clear to everyone watching that this wasn't just a moment between a child and a dog. It was the moment two broken souls began to recognize themselves in each other. The world outside the shelter kept moving. Cars passing, people talking, life going on. But inside that narrow corridor, time stood still. The wounded hero and the little girl who couldn't run anymore sat on opposite sides of a metal cage, breathing the same quiet air, both beginning to believe, for the first time in a long while, that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. The world had gone impossibly quiet. Even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath, softening against the windows like it didn't want to interrupt what was unfolding inside. Emma sat completely still, her wheelchair locked in place a few feet from Rex's cage. Between them stood only the cold steel bars, streaked with age and rust, like the lines of an old scar. Rex watched her. He hadn't moved for what felt like hours. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath uncertain. His eyes, amber and weary, reflected the thin strip of light cutting through the corridor. That light touched Emma's face too, small, pale, and unflinchingly calm. She could feel her mother's presence behind her, hovering close, every muscle in her body tense, and she could hear the soft, uneven breaths of the volunteers watching from behind the glass. The entire shelter had gone still, as if the building itself understood something sacred was about to happen. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her hand. Her voice, when it came, was no louder than a whisper. "It's okay," she said. "I'm not here to hurt you." Laura gasped quietly. "Emma, don't—" Her voice cracked with fear, but the little girl didn't stop. She reached her hand forward, inch by inch, until her fingertips hovered just beyond the metal bars. "Sweetheart, please," her mother whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." Emma's eyes never left Rex. Her voice was soft but sure, as though she were speaking to a wounded friend. "He's not bad, Mom. He's just scared." Rex shifted his weight, muscles rippling beneath his fur. His claws scraped faintly against the floor. His gaze flicked between Emma's hand and her eyes. The space between them felt electric, charged with fear, trust, and something deeper neither of them could name. He took one slow step forward. Every volunteer stiffened. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Rex stopped. The distance between his nose and her outstretched fingers was barely an inch. His nostrils flared as he breathed her in. The faint scent of soap, the soft hint of flowers from her hair, the metallic tang of the chair's wheels. Emma stayed perfectly still. Only her fingertips moved, opening slightly as if to say, "I'm here." It's safe. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Rex flinched. His head jerked back. The growl that had once lived in his chest rose for half a second, but it died just as quickly, swallowed by confusion. His breathing came faster now, uneven, like someone fighting between instinct and longing. Emma's hand didn't move. She waited. She didn't pull back, didn't cry, didn't speak. She simply waited, patient and calm, letting him decide. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," she whispered. The words floated across the space between them, soft as a prayer. Rex froze. The light shifted as a cloud passed over the skylight, dimming the corridor until it was just the two of them in shadow. Emma could see his body trembling, not in aggression, but in fear. Every part of him screamed to run, to retreat, to stay safe. And yet, slowly, he began to move forward again. His nose brushed against the metal bars. Then, tentatively, it inched closer, closer, until she could feel his warm breath on her skin. Her heart hammered in her chest, and then, finally, his muzzle touched her palm. Time stopped. The air in the shelter seemed to thicken with emotion. The volunteers behind the glass clapped hands over their mouths. Laura pressed both palms to her chest, tears spilling freely down her face. Rex let out a low, trembling sound, half sigh, half whimper. His body shuddered once, then relaxed. He pressed his head against her hand, the roughness of his fur brushing her skin. Emma's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. She had imagined this moment, what it might feel like to connect again, to be trusted, but she had never expected it to happen like this. She ran her fingers gently along the bridge of his nose, feeling every scar beneath the fur, every ridge of healed pain. "See," she whispered, "you're safe now." Rex closed his eyes. His entire body seemed to melt into the floor, muscles loosening, shoulders dropping. The transformation was subtle but profound, like a mountain slowly exhaling after years of holding its breath. Mrs. Donnelly, who had been silently clutching her clipboard, turned away. Tears rolled down her cheeks unchecked. "I can't believe it," she murmured. He's letting her touch him." Lydia wiped her face, her voice shaking. "He never lets anyone close. Not even me." Laura sank to her knees beside Emma, covering her mouth as she whispered, "You did it, baby. You did it." But Emma shook her head slightly. Her voice hushed. "No, Mom. We did it." She looked down at Rex. He just needed someone to believe in him again. Rex stayed pressed against her palm, his breathing slow and steady now. His eyes opened once more, meeting hers, and for the first time, they weren't the eyes of a monster. They were tired, yes, but there was something else there too. Recognition. A flicker of hope. Emma smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since the accident. It wasn't the forced, polite smile she gave doctors or neighbors. It was small and quiet, but full of light. The kind of smile that said, maybe everything broken isn't lost after all. Behind them, the volunteers were crying openly now. The shelter, once a place of noise and despair, felt different, alive, lighter. The sound of rain outside had faded completely, replaced by the soft hum of a world daring to heal. Rex let out one more deep exhale, a sigh so low and long it almost sounded human. His body went still again, but not from fear. This time it was peace. Emma leaned forward, whispering through her tears, "You're not a bad dog, Rex. You're just sad. But it's okay now. You don't have to be alone anymore. He blinked once, slow and deliberate. A silent acknowledgement, the smallest nod of trust. Laura reached out, placing a trembling hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Let's give him a rest." Emma nodded but didn't pull her hand away just yet. She let her fingers linger against his fur for one last moment, memorizing the feel of it. Coarse, warm, alive. Then she slowly drew her hand back. Rex's nose followed for half a second, before stopping, as if to say, "Don't go too far." The girl smiled again, whispering, "I'll be back, okay?" Rex didn't move, but his tail, that heavy, silent tail that hadn't wagged in months, twitched once. Just once. But it was enough. The volunteers gasped softly. Mrs. Donnelly pressed a trembling hand over her mouth and whispered, "We just saw a miracle." As Emma's wheelchair turned slowly toward the hallway, the light shifted again. The sun broke free from the clouds outside, spilling through the skylight in a sudden beam that illuminated the cage, the girl and the dog within it. And for that single, fleeting moment, the world wasn't a shelter filled with cages and scars. It was a place where two broken souls had finally found each other. The transformation had begun. The rain had stopped by the time afternoon light filtered through the narrow office windows. The shelter was quieter now. Most of the volunteers had gone home, leaving behind the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the scent of coffee that had long gone cold. But in the small office at the end of the hall, something far more important was taking place. On the desk sat a thick folder labeled Rex. Its corners were frayed, the red caution stamp nearly faded from months of handling. Beside it lay a small stack of papers, the adoption forms, half filled, half trembling beneath the womb. Soft draft from the fan. Mrs. Donnelly stood behind the desk, her glasses slipping down her nose as she looked at Emma and Laura seated before her. Her hands fidgeted with a pen, tapping it nervously against the wood. "Are you absolutely sure?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He's never trusted anyone before. Not once." Laura's fingers intertwined in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. But her voice, though trembling, held a kind of strength that came only from a mother who had seen miracles happen right in front of her. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm sure." Mrs. Donnelly frowned slightly, as if searching for the right words. "He's unpredictable. We can't guarantee—" Laura cut in gently. "You can't guarantee any of them, can you?" She glanced toward the glass window that looked out into the corridor. Through it, she could just barely see Rex sitting quietly in his kennel, the tip of his tail brushing the floor. "But I saw something in him today," she continued, her voice cracking. "The same thing I saw in my daughter when she woke up in that hospital bed and refused to give up." Emma was silent, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. But her eyes, those wide, deep brown eyes, were steady and full of something that silenced every doubt in the room. Mrs. Donnelly followed her gaze to the child, then back to the folder. She sighed, a long, weary breath. "He's been here almost a year," she said. "No one ever got close. Not one person. Until today." Laura nodded. Maybe that's because he wasn't waiting for just anyone. She turned, her voice softening as she looked at her daughter. Maybe they were both waiting for each other. The room went still. For a moment, Mrs. Donnelly didn't speak. Her hand hovered above the pen, her eyes searching their faces for even a hint of hesitation. There was none. Only the quiet, resolute certainty of two souls who had already made up their minds. Finally, she exhaled and nodded. "All right," she said softly. "Let's make it official." The pen scratched across the paper, its sound almost too loud in the still room. Each stroke felt monumental, like signing away not just a contract, but a past full of pain. When she finished, Mrs. Donnelly turned the papers toward them. "Just sign here," she said. Laura took the pen, her hand trembling as she wrote her name. Then she handed it to Emma, who gripped it carefully and drew slow, deliberate letters across the line. Her handwriting was shaky, uneven, but beautiful in its effort. When she finished, she looked up with a small, nervous smile. "Does that mean he's ours now?" Mrs. Donnelly swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. He's yours." The door opened behind them. Lydia stepped in, holding a leash in one hand, the same worn leather collar that had hung from Rex's neck since the day he arrived. It had been cleaned, polished, the frayed edges mended. The metal tag jingled softly as she walked. "Here," Lydia said quietly, crouching down beside Emma. "You should be the one to put it on him." Emma reached out and took the leash. The leather was cool against her palms, and for a moment she just stared at it, as if it were something sacred. Then she wheeled herself forward, out into the hall, where the cage doors glinted under the soft light. Rex was waiting. He stood at the front of his kennel, no growl, no trembling. His ears were tilted forward, curious. When he saw her, his body stiffened, not in fear, but in uncertainty, like he didn't quite believe this was real. The volunteers who remained gathered quietly at a distance. Some held phones in their hands. Others just watched with hands pressed to their hearts. Emma stopped just before the kennel and whispered, "Hey, buddy." Rex's ears twitched. She held up the leash with both hands. "You ready to go home?" Mrs. Donnelly nodded at one of the volunteers, who slowly unlatched the kennel door. The metal creaked as it swung open. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Rex stepped forward, hesitant, deliberate, his claws clicking softly against the floor. Emma extended her hand, and just like before, he pressed his muzzle into her palm. The same sigh escaped him, low and human-like. But this time, it was different. It wasn't fear leaving him. It was surrender. Lydia covered her mouth, whispering, "He knows." Emma looped the collar around his neck, her fingers careful, reverent. The moment the buckle clicked, a hush fell over the entire shelter. Rex didn't move away. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his head beside her wheelchair. His body relaxed, shoulders dropping, as if he'd been waiting years for that exact touch. Emma smiled, a full, radiant smile that lit her whole face. Tears welled in her mother's eyes as she crouched beside her daughter, whispering, "You did it, sweetheart." But Emma shook her head gently. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "We did it. He just needed someone to believe he still mattered." Behind them, Mrs. Donnelly dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The volunteers clapped softly, the sound echoing gently through the quiet halls. Lydia let out a choked sob into her sleeve, whispering, "He's finally going home." For the first time since anyone could remember, Rex's tail began to wag, not fast, not playful, but slow and steady, like a heartbeat rediscovering its rhythm. Emma held the leash, her small hand wrapped tightly around it. The sunlight streaming through the high windows caught the golden strands in her hair and the soft gleam of Rex's fur. He turned his head toward her, eyes warm, his body pressed close beside her chair. It wasn't the picture of perfection. It was better. It was the image of two souls who had been to the edge of despair and somehow found their way back. Mrs. Donnelly stepped forward and placed her hand gently on Emma's shoulder. "Take good care of him, okay?" Emma nodded, her eyes shining. "I will." Laura brushed a tear from her cheek, whispering, "Let's go home, Rex." And as they rolled toward the shelter's front door, the sound of quiet applause followed them. In the doorway, Rex paused for just a second, turning his head back toward the hall that had been his prison for so long. Then he looked up at Emma, as if to ask, "Is it really okay to leave the past behind?" Her gentle smile gave him the answer. Together, they stepped out into the sunlight, the girl and the once-feared dog, crossing from shadow into something new. It wasn't just adoption, it was rebirth. The first few weeks at home were quiet, careful, like walking through a dream that could vanish if they breathed too hard. Rex had a new bed in the corner of Emma's room, a soft blue blanket folded neatly beside her wheelchair. He'd circle it 3 times before lying down each night, muscles tense even in sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the window, made his ears flick and his eyes open. The house smelled of safety, lavender candles, warm soup, and the faint sweetness of Emma's shampoo. But to Rex, it was all strange. The echo of old memories clung to him like the scent of fear he could never quite shake. During the day, he followed Emma from room to room. His paws were heavy against the hardwood, slow and cautious. Sometimes he'd stop and stare out the window, the sunlight touching the scars across his neck, and his reflection in the glass looked almost like another dog, one he used to be. At first, he wouldn't eat unless she was near. The clink of his bowl made him flinch. When a car backfired outside, he'd drop low, tail tucked, eyes darting toward the door like he was waiting for an order that would never come. Laura tried to hide her worry. "He's adjusting," she said more to herself than to anyone else, watching from the kitchen doorway as Rex lay beside Emma's chair, his head resting on his paws. But it was Emma who understood. She didn't rush him. She didn't speak when the silence was too heavy. Instead, she just stayed. Every night, before bed, she'd wheel closer to him. The soft hum of her chair was the only sound in the room. She'd stop just beside his blanket and whisper stories, sometimes about school, sometimes about the stars. Sometimes she'd hum the lullabies her mother used to sing when the hospital lights kept her awake. At first, Rex would only lift his head slightly, one ear twitching toward her voice. But soon, his breathing would match the rhythm of her song, slower, calmer. The sound of her voice became his tether, something solid in a world that had been full of loss. Still, the nights weren't always kind. The first nightmare came 2 weeks after he arrived. The rain was falling hard outside, drumming against the roof. Emma woke to the sound of claws scraping against the floor. Rex was pacing, panting, eyes wide and wild. A low growl trembled in his throat, not of anger, but of terror. He didn't see her, didn't see the room, just shadows of the past. "Rex," she whispered. He didn't respond. A flash of lightning illuminated his scars, and he jumped, letting out a sharp bark that rattled the glass. Emma's heart broke. She wheeled closer, her hands shaking, voice trembling, but steady enough to reach him. "Hey, it's okay," she whispered. "You're home now. It's just thunder." The next flash came, brighter this time. He froze, body stiff, tail low, ears pinned back. Then he whimpered, a small, broken sound that carried years of pain. Without thinking, Emma leaned forward and extended her hand. "Come here," she said softly. For a moment he didn't move. Then slowly, cautiously, he crawled toward her, his head lowered until it rested against her knee. "It's okay," she whispered again, brushing her fingers through his fur. "You're safe." A crack of thunder made them both flinch, but neither pulled away. Emma could feel his heartbeat racing under her hand. Fast, frantic, alive. She placed her other hand on his head, letting him feel the steady rhythm of her touch. "Shh, it's just noise," she said, though her own voice wavered. "It can't hurt us." Rex pressed harder into her lap, trembling, until his breathing slowed. His nose was wet against her hand, his fur damp from rain that had splattered in through the open window. Emma closed her eyes, and for a long time they stayed like that, two small beings holding each other through the storm. When the thunder finally faded, Rex exhaled a long, deep sigh. His eyes closed, his body relaxed, and for the first time in years, he fell asleep not from exhaustion, but from peace. Laura stood quietly in the doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth. The sight was too much. Her daughter, the little girl who used to cry herself to sleep, now comforting a creature no one else could reach. Tears blurred her vision. She turned off the hallway light and whispered to herself, "They're saving each other." Days passed, and slowly, something inside Rex began to shift. The growls disappeared. His steps grew surer. He followed Emma into the backyard each morning, pacing beside her wheelchair as she fed the birds. At first, he stayed a few feet away, but one morning, he brushed against her wheel, his shoulder touching it gently, a silent sign of trust. Emma laughed softly, running her hand through his fur. "See? I told you it wasn't so scary out here." He wagged his tail. Not much, just a few slow swishes, but it was enough to make her smile. The neighbors began to notice. They'd stand at their fences or pause on their morning walks, watching the once feared German shepherd walking patiently beside the little girl. "Is that the same dog from the shelter?" one whispered. "I heard he used to be dangerous," said another. Laura smiled from the porch, shaking her head. "Not anymore." Rex lifted his head when he heard voices, but didn't bark. He just stayed close to Emma, his body between her and the world, protective but calm. Each day, they ventured a little farther, down the driveway, then around the block, then to the park. Children pointed, amazed. A few even came up to pet him. Rex stood still, uncertain at first, then leaned into the touch with a sigh. Emma's laughter returned to the air, bright and unguarded. It had been months since Laura had heard it that way, free of pain, free of fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Emma sat beside Rex on the porch. The air was cool, filled with the scent of rain-soaked grass. She reached out, resting her hand on his paw. "You know," she said softly, "we're both still learning, huh?" Rex turned his head, licking her hand once before laying his head on her lap. "Yeah," she whispered, smiling. "We'll get there." And in that golden light, surrounded by the quiet hum of life continuing, the scars that once defined them both began to fade. Not because they were forgotten, but because they were finally being replaced by something stronger. Something called trust. The morning of the parade broke bright and golden, with the kind of sunlight that seems to promise something good. The town's main street was already alive with the buzz of excitement. Flags fluttering, children running between rows of chairs, the brass band tuning up near the gazebo. Balloons bobbed in the air, their strings glinting silver in the light breeze. In the middle of it all, behind the line of floats and fire trucks, stood Emma and Rex. Emma wore a soft blue dress and a matching ribbon in her hair. Her wheelchair gleamed, freshly polished by her mother that morning, decorated with small paper stars and the words, "Hope lives here," written carefully along the side. Beside her, Rex sat tall and steady, wearing a dark vest with a small police insignia patch stitched over the heart, not as a symbol of what he'd lost, but of what he had found again. He looked regal, his coat shining in the morning sun. But if anyone looked close enough, they could still see the faint scars along his neck, reminders of the life that came before. Emma's hands fidgeted in her lap. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. The crowd outside was growing, and she could already hear the echo of drums and laughter. "Mom," she whispered, glancing up. What if he gets scared?" Laura knelt beside her, adjusting the edge of the vest on Rex's back. "He won't," she said softly. "He's not the same dog anymore." Emma smiled faintly, but her voice trembled. "I guess I'm not the same either." Laura brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "No," she said, smiling through the emotion building in her chest. "You're both stronger." From nearby, a volunteer with a clipboard called out, "Group 7, you're up next. The Children's Foundation and therapy partners, line up." That was them. Emma took a deep breath. Her hand tightened around the leash. Rex glanced up at her, sensing the tension. His ears flicked forward, and then, as if to reassure her, he pressed his nose gently against her arm. She laughed softly. "Okay, buddy. I guess we've got this." The sound of music swelled down the street. The band had started. The parade moved forward. As their group turned the corner onto Main Street, the chatter of the crowd quieted, replaced by the rhythmic beat of drums and the shimmer of sunlight bouncing off parade floats. And then, all at once, people began to notice them. The little girl in the wheelchair, the huge German shepherd walking at her side. A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. Some people gasped. Others smiled in disbelief. A few whispered to each other, "Is that him? The one from the shelter?" Children waved, wide-eyed, pointing at the dog with the shiny vest. "Look, Mommy! The police dog!" one boy shouted. Rex walked in perfect rhythm beside Emma's chair, his head level with her arm, his stride steady and proud. Each turn of her wheels matched the beat of his paws against the pavement. The leash between them swayed gently, not as restraint, but as a connection. The band's music rose, trumpets bright, drums strong, and it was as if the melody itself carried them forward. Emma smiled shyly as applause rippled through the crowd. At first, she didn't know where to look, but then she saw the faces. People not just watching, but feeling. Some had tears in their eyes. Some held their hands over their hearts. "Is that really the same dog?" someone whispered. Laura, walking behind, nodded proudly. "Yes, that's Rex." A firefighter wiped his eyes. "That dog used to be a monster. Look at him now." Rex's ears perked at the sound, his eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't flinch or cower. Instead, he lifted his head high, as if understanding that the world finally saw him as he truly was. "You're doing great," Emma whispered. Though her voice was lost in the music, Rex's tail moved once, slow and sure. The parade rolled on beneath the climbing sun. Nearing the town square, Emma noticed a man standing apart, tall, broad-shouldered, his faded uniform speaking of long service. His gaze was fixed on Rex. For a moment the noise fell away. The man's weathered face softened with recognition. "Mom," Emma murmured. "Who's that?" Laura followed her gaze and shook her head. I don't know. But the man was already moving forward. Rex noticed him too. His step faltered slightly, ears twitching as if some old memory stirred. The man raised a trembling hand and saluted. "Good boy, Rex," he whispered. "You found your purpose again." Rex froze, then stepped closer to Emma, pressing against her chair as if to say, "This is home now." The officer smiled through tears. Music swelled, echoing like triumph down Main Street. At the reviewing stand, the mayor leaned into the microphone. "Today," he said warmly, "we celebrate courage, not only the kind that fights, but the kind that forgives and begins again." Applause thundered. Emma lifted her chin, waving with one hand while holding Rex's leash with the other. Rex walked proudly beside her, his vest gleaming, his scars now marks of survival. When the parade turned its last corner, the cheers softened to quiet talk. People would remember the girl in the chair and the scarred dog walking as if born to protect her. For now, it was enough that the moment existed, a small victory marching down Main Street, carried by love and second chances. As the last note faded, sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the town in gold. Rex lifted his head to the light. He wasn't the broken dog from the shelter anymore. He was Rex, protector, companion, proof that even the wounded can find home again. That night, the world was still. Crickets hummed, and the wind whispered through the grass. In the backyard under a sky of stars, Emma sat wrapped in a blanket beside the garden's lavender. Rex lay next to her, his head resting on her lap, his breathing steady and calm. Moonlight shimmered across his fur, tracing the faint scars like silver constellations, reminders of what they had survived. Emma's fingers moved gently through his coat. A wind chime sang softly, its melody carried by the cool night air. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Emma whispered, "We made it, didn't we?" Rex's tail thumped once, slow and content. "I knew you would," she said, brushing his ear, "even when no one else did." Her gaze lifted to the stars. "I used to think broken things couldn't be fixed, that once something was hurt, it stayed that way. But maybe broken things don't need fixing. Maybe they just need to be loved until they feel whole again." Rex sighed, leaning closer into her lap. From the doorway, Laura watched quietly, her sweater wrapped tight. She didn't speak. She simply smiled and stepped back inside, leaving them to the sacred quiet. Emma tilted her head back, voice soft. "Mom says miracles happen when you're lucky, but I think miracles happen when two hearts stop running away." The words floated into the night, and Rex's ears twitched. "Sometimes," she continued, "broken hearts find each other, not to fix what's lost, but to remind the world that love still works miracles." Rex looked up at her, his golden eyes reflecting the stars. She cupped his muzzle gently. "You're my miracle." His tail brushed the grass, a slow rhythm of peace. The night deepened. Fireflies blinked along the fence, their lights rising and falling like sparks from a fading fire. The air felt alive, full of life, full of meaning. Emma didn't move. She wanted to remember it all. The scent of lavender, the sound of the wind, the heartbeat beneath her hand. She thought of the shelter, Rex's hollow eyes behind bars, the growl that almost sent her away, the first touch that changed everything. If someone had told her this would be the ending, two souls whole again, she wouldn't have believed it. But life had a strange way of healing the impossible. The wind carried distant laughter and a faint song from the town. All of it folded into their small, quiet world. Emma's hand found Rex's collar, tracing the silver tag that caught the moonlight. It read, Rex, loved, home, forever. Thank you, she whispered, for finding me. Rex blinked slowly, pressing his head against her. Their breathing fell into the same rhythm, 2 steady heartbeats beneath the stars. Laura peeked out once more, saw them together, and quietly closed the door. The porch light glowed softly behind her. The garden shimmered in the pale light. Lavender swayed, grass whispered. A shooting star crossed the sky, brief, brilliant, gone. Emma didn't see it. She was already lost in the peace of the moment. Her hand rested in Rex's fur. You can rest now, she murmured. We're safe. Rex gave one final sigh and closed his eyes. The night settled, calm and endless. The stars above seemed to keep watch. Along the damp ground ran 2 sets of marks, the faint tracks of wheels and the deep prints of a dog's paws, side by side. The earth held what words could not, that here, love had done what no one thought it could. Under the silver sky, 2 souls rested, together, whole, home. Sometimes, stories like Emma and Rex remind us of something simple but powerful, that love can heal in ways words never could. German shepherds, especially, have this rare kind of loyalty that goes beyond obedience. It's a bond written in trust, patience, and quiet understanding. When we open our hearts to them, they give us back something pure, a reminder that we're never truly alone. If you've ever felt that same connection with your own dog, or maybe you're still learning how to build it, there's a resource I've found that can help you deepen that bond. Nothing fancy, just something genuine and kind. I'll leave the link for you to explore if it feels right. Take a little time tonight to sit beside your dog, rest your hand on their fur, and just breathe together. You might be surprised how much they already understand.